So, welcome everybody to this Tunelark live event. This is our third session with Stu Pender, thinking about songwriting. He gave us some music theory to start with, thinking about how to apply that music theory to your instruments. And today he's going to talk about some intuition and some how to use your inner hearing and the things that you might intuitively know that you don't realize. So, we're excited to do this next session with him. Think about music in the future and for, of course, this holiday season, we're sponsoring gift cards. Think about someone on your holiday list that might really enjoy putting music in their lives. If you want to study some music, put it on your Christmas list. And we have many, many great teachers on our roster at Tunelark, including Stu Pender. So, Stu, take it away and tell us more about songwriting.
Hey, I'm so happy to be here. This is, like Kate said, the third in our series here on intuition and using the inner ear. And I guess let's just dive in. We talked about playing some chords on the guitar, some music theory, and this is more kind of just learning to, let that stuff go and trust in yourself and, it's a more process oriented, I think, which is something that doesn't get talked about as much. Um, so I'd like to start just how do you prepare your space to make music? How do you um, get in the right mind state and set some time aside? So I like to first start by just putting in my calendar or setting aside a certain time of the day that's just going to be a chunk of time dedicated towards making music with that intention, so that way you're not distracted by anything else coming in, and you have a set allotted amount of time, and that definitely helps me kind of relax into just focusing on what I'm working on. And so I just like to check in, like simple things, just like awareness of my breath, sensations in the body. There are some great, I've gotten some great Alexander technique tips from teachers. A lot of the classical teachers love this stuff. And there's one called the semi-supine position, which I've really loved. And I'm not an expert in it, but you lay on your back and, your knees can be upright though. And you just imagine the instrument in your hand. It doesn't have to be there. And you just notice, you can imagine yourself playing. Um, my teacher also gave the example of imagine yourself driving a car if you need some more stress to come in. And you just feel for, is there any tension coming in? Usually for me, it's in the shoulders, it's in the hands. It's that anticipation of like, oh, I've got to play something right. And you just kind of breathe into it and let those things release. Because we want to come in with a clear slate, a clean slate. This is really effective. Kenny Werner, who's a great jazz pianist, teaches this in his Effortless Mastery book. You have a very similar technique, but you just have the instrument in your hand, like you're ready to play. And how's your body doing now? Check in, and usually for me, there's always something. I'm always anticipating. I'm always, anticipating like, what am I gonna have to play? Am I ready to play it? And we just want to let go of those things because we're trying to be in a free, open state to just make some music, especially for songwriting. Um, and so, there's also a great book by David Leisner called "Playing with Ease." He's a classical guitarist who teaches at the Manhattan School of Music, and he talks about postures for effortless playing, and it's a book full of probably 50 or more lessons worth of material. But a very good one that I like to think about is just like, what's a good sitting posture? And he talks about flexion and extension of the muscles and the joints, and how we're engaging the bicep, the tricep when we move outward and inward, and the 90 degrees on most of our joints is where it's at total rest. And this is usually from a classical guitarist point of view going to be, the best way to hold the guitar. The hand usually in about a C shape, kind of at rest, And you can think even about the hips. You can think about the knees this way. What's the height of my chair? Um, and you also don't want to feel so stiff that you feel locked into the position. You want to feel free, but these are good starting places. I always feel um, of like how am I entering my songwriting session here? So that's a lot on just preparing the space and getting ready to play. Um, and one more quote that I always love from one of my teachers, Derek Gripper, is as you get into playing, he says as you play faster, play lighter, and that's just more on this kind of like as we get nervous about what we're playing and we're pushing the limits and the boundaries of what we can do. I think from my experience, I tend to tense up, so I always have to remind myself that. So let's get on to the next part here, which is allowing music to happen. There's a great cellist, David Darling, who has this bit called One Quality Sound. And I really like this idea because you don't really even have to be a musician to make this happen. And the kind of exercise here is you can use your voice, you can use an instrument, and the idea is you're just going to start with one quality sound. Sincere, relaxed, totally immersed in just making this sound. And you want to play it like it's the best note you've ever played in your life. It's the best thing ever. It's just one sound, and there's no wrong note when you're being sincere. Um, and when we put two quality notes next to each other, we start to build a melody. And so this is we talked about scales the last few weeks. This is maybe a more, easy to enter way of doing it without much understanding of what scale am I in. We're just taking two quality notes and we're letting our ear guide. So it's, And so I always also like to pair the voice with the guitar. I find that, if you can sing and match the note you're playing on the guitar, you get a nice connection with the notes that you're playing. It becomes a little easier to play by ear. And this exercise over time, just by doing it over time, with time, practice, you're going to gain the confidence that these melodies are coming out absolutely correct. You start to get this quality of like, this undeniability of the melody coming through, and confidence in it, that you're not playing the wrong note. So, and so you start to get some ideas. Ideas are coming through. Always have a voice memo recorder at your side. You wanna fill that up. And there's a great idea also from songwriter Jeff Tweedy. I've heard him talk about this a lot. He's from the band Wilco, great songwriter. And he talks about this idea of taking voice memos of, song sketches, and he calls them scratch takes or scratch lyrics. And so he'll take, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it's a similar idea to this one quality sound after another, and you're letting you can vocalize melodies. Sometimes they will sound like words. You can sing gibberish, that's, I think, how he puts it more so. He's just like, And so you might, I don't you just have fun with it. And then you might go back to this voice memo the next day. Kind of, I like to let myself kind of actually forget about it a little bit. And then you go back and listen to what you sang, and do any of those sound like lyrics? And a lot of times it's interesting because a word sounds like it's trying to come through, and you have these impressions and sketches of like a lyric and maybe a few lyrics, maybe you know uh, maybe there's an idea, maybe there's not an idea there. Who knows? But you see what's there. And Jeff talks about this as a way to kind of bypass the inner critic. And I think a lot of this is what we're doing in all of these exercises, is we're trying to find ways to bypass that voice that's saying, this isn't good enough, I'm not good enough, what if what if this song is horrible? Am I wasting my time? And so we're just getting past that, and we're just hopping into action and doing it. And by kind of singing gibberish sometimes and just trying not to make sense, sometimes we find some really interesting things that we can sit down and be more intentional about in a writing session in the future. So that's Jeff Tweedy's idea of scratch lyrics. And while we're on the singing note too, just a note for instrumentalists, myself included as a guitarist. You can really consider phrasing like a vocalist. It's really helpful. And so singing along is extremely helpful when you're improvising. Throw a few riffs in there still. But these are elements like breath and silence, and you don't always think about that when you don't have to breathe. And so leaving space is required when you're singing. And this is the kind of thing that you hear in the phrasing of great jazz musicians and great composers. And so that can be a really helpful thing if it's an instrumental piece that you're writing. So we're talking about these one quality sounds after another. Harmony is like, we talked about melody being sound after sound after sound. Harmony is like now stacking them vertically. And so it's like two or more quality sounds happening at the same time. And so you might, approach this from an intuitive way by just that. You find your one. If you're on a guitar, I always love, one of those sounds that you play in harmony can be the open strings. Sometimes, depending on the key you're in, it doesn't work so well. Sometimes it does. So here I'm, using a drop D tuning and getting some bass notes in there. And, you might even get the open G and E string in there, and you can find some really interesting voicings that you wouldn't get from a music theory perspective necessarily. This is more kind of using the instrument. we talked about some out of key chords also. We talked about the minor 4 chord. A popular one is the major 2. There's a lot, that's a whole study in itself. One way you can kind of, intuitively enter into that is, if we're talking about one quality note, maybe you try one wrong note. And, yeah, so, let's try this, Maybe with these wrong notes we're picking, there is no wrong note. You can always find a note to support it. And so this is where actually having a teacher can be very helpful, as you're like, oh, what is this? I really like the way this melody note sits. What am I listening to here? What is this, and how can I, are there chord voicings to play around this? Are there better voicings? Are there, is there a set of rules that I can learn to better use this in different contexts and to kind of make a learning experience out of it? Because oftentimes we know these sounds, we've listened to this music all of our lives, and we know all these, out of key chord changes, and that can be one of the most frustrating things, is not knowing how to access it, but having it kind of in our heads somewhere. So, if you let your ear guide you, sometimes you might come across some of those naturally more easily than you would if you're coming from a strictly theory background. And so usually, a good teacher can help you identify, like, what am I looking at, and give you a series of things to kind of consider and practice on your instrument. And that can be a really good use of lessons in the context of learning songs, songwriting, and pretty much just developing a voice on your instrument. So letting wrong notes happen. And as you practice the chords we looked at last week, in the key of C major and other keys, you're going to start to gain kind of an intuitive sense for, like, what does the 4 chord sound like? And you can kind of, as you're strumming along, you can kind of anticipate, like, oh yeah, I think it's going to be this is a 4 chord sound coming up here. And you start to gain an intuition for those things, based on kind of your past experience of playing with them. So that's kind of a good thing of, practice over time. So we've talked about harmony and melody now. One great teacher that I had when I was in college, John Abercrombie, he's a jazz guitarist, had one of the just, best lessons for me in kind of bridging melody and harmony. And what he said was, I think it was in response to me asking a very complicated chord change, what scale do I improvise over this? This looks complicated. And his response was something along the lines of, well, I had a student tell me that it was the C altered dominant scale, but and from that part of the answer, I kind of assumed, like, okay, he knows what the scale is. He doesn't think that way. He's not, he's telling me he doesn't really think of it that way, though. But he knows what it is. But he told me, like, just take the chord, put it on a loop pedal, or, put it in recording software now and put it on a loop, and just improvise over it. Treat it like he in his words, he's like, treat it like a raga or a meditation. You have this and this might be another place where it's like, hit a wrong note. Maybe the wrong note's kind of cool, actually. Victor Wooten talk about this a lot. He says something to the effect of, you want to be able to play any note over any chord. You know, you want to know how to get yourself out of out of a mistake, maybe. So there you go. And so for John's exercise, you might discover what you discover might be a scale. It probably will be a scale. It might be a couple scales though, actually, which is why it's nice to kind of leave it open in that way. You might find, oh, there's more than one option over this chord that I can, whether I'm soloing or I'm just writing a vocal melody or a melody on whatever instrument I play. That can be a really nice listening exercise. Yeah, just spending time with one chord. And yeah, and on that note too of composition versus improvisation, I think about this a lot. Two almost different practices, but in a way, I've had a teacher tell me this, which was always really interesting to me, is that improvisation is the process of creating music in real time in the moment, and composition is the same process over a longer time span. And you can. That was a helpful way for me to think of it. So for what that's worth, take it how you will. So the next stage that I like to think about, which we kind of touched on, is kind of expanding our intuition, and that is practicing, learning new things on the instrument. I like this idea that our intuition is dependent on our skill set. And I heard this quote recently that if you aim for simplicity, master complexity. And so again, this is where having a good teacher can come in and help, because along the way, when you are treating music in this way and playing and writing, you will probably run up against some roadblocks where an instrumental technique where you're hearing something, you can't quite get it, you can't quite grasp the full picture of it. And so not only is these are the exciting areas where our practice lies. This is the fun bit. When we find those areas, that's where we grow. And that's also why a teacher is so helpful, because they can help kind of untangle those knots for you and really be able to put you in the right direction. So yeah, I always like to just bring that up, because some people think, it's like, sometimes the attitude is like, oh, if I don't know something, it's like, because I'm, not good enough or something. And it's actually kind of the exciting areas of exploration, really. So that's at least my attitude towards practice and working with a teacher and all of that. And kind of, along the lines of this, on this kind of songwriting thread, composition thread, improvisation, you might get to the point of wanting to record your music, because we're talking about, you make sure you're at least recording voice memos, because you'll probably have really good ideas. And that's always such a good way to gauge your progress over time. You'll be surprised, in a year's time, like just how far you've come if you're taking voice memos. There's some great apps for songwriting. I've already shouted out one of them, voice memos. And GarageBand for iOS and Mac is amazing. The Mac one is really good now, actually. The newest update is probably, honestly, all that most people probably need. I've gone back to using it. I also use Ableton Live, which is for more complex recordings. But once you start using music software, you might want to consider creative limitations, because option paralysis becomes a really very quick reality with these softwares. Like, way too many things are possible. So you want to learn ways that you can limit your sonic palette. One of them is by using a software like GarageBand or something, where it's like, yeah, you just hit record and play your guitar and sing. You know, writing the song beforehand with the voice memo. That's another kind of creative limitation, like not doing it in the software, where you can get caught up with like, tweaking an equalizer for 2 hours. Been there. um, and so those things, the just saying like, okay, I'm only going to use this set of instruments. I'm only going to use this scale, or I'm going to use this chord. But creative limitations are a good thing usually because they allow you to be a little freer without, which sounds kind of paradoxical, but I've always found, when you don't have option paralysis, I feel a little more able to be creative. So that's something to experiment with, see how that works for yourself. Um, I like to, oh, and so I like to think of, on one last tangent here, just stages of development and file management. I keep folders for, basically I like to keep ideas, initial ideas, in progress, and complete folders. That works for me. Everybody else, everybody has a different file management system, but these are things that, when we're doing loose creative things, it's good to have structure. And let's see, what else do we have? Just a few last considerations. I know we're probably running up a little late on time here. Um, One quote that I loved from producer Rick Rubin, he says he doesn't listen to his music unless he's actively in the studio working on it, because it can be a bit locked in when we get used to just listening to our stuff over and over again. And so it's a nice way to kind of keep things free and able to still change and not get too obsessed with it. And on that note, there's a Pablo Picasso quote as well that, there's nothing worse than a brilliant beginning, which is probably for the same reason. I've heard Brian Eno, he loves that quote. He's another music producer, and the music software lets us get such a perfect start, such a shiny start, and we can become really attached to it. And I think that's what Rick's getting at too. It can be hard to ever change it. So, we want to keep it loose, open, free, and just, flowing with just like the music is. So, um,
Well,
yeah,
this is great, Stu. I think part of what you've helped, help people understand is that you do need to free yourself. And the idea, I love the whole paralysis business because it's so true. Like there's the, I remember a situation where I was working with Photoshop and it was way back in the day, and somebody said they'd been working with it for 2 years and they still hadn't even begun to scratch the surface. Like that just, but taking those germs of ideas and moving with them. And I also really appreciate you mentioning teachers. I think that that's what Tunelark's all about, is our efforts to help more people access music, create music, be a part of the creative process. And it's great for people to have teachers like yourself and other teachers to help guide them and share the journey. So
yeah,
it's great. Well, thank you for this songwriting series. This is great. And we'll have this recorded for the future as well. And we hope to hear more from you after the first of the year.
absolutely. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.